Season 2, Episode 4.
I'm James.
And I'm Pat.
And this is UX Podcast, advancing business, technology, people and society since May 2011. And with listeners new and old all over the world, from Thailand to Curacao.
And wow, do we have an interview for you today. It's been a long time coming, but we did it, and it was by chance. We are talking to Nathan Shedroff and Chris Noessel. And we haven't done that in 11 years. The pair of them.
Well, with the pair of them together, we haven't done. We first talked to them in episode 25, which is 11 years ago, as you said, on the back of their book that was released at the time called Make It So, about science fiction interfaces. And both Chris and Nathan have written, numerous books over the years. Which actually, to be honest, I think there's too many to list.
There's too many to list, and we will obviously link to their respective online profiles in the show notes. And today's interview was recorded at UXLx, which is a conference that is held every May in Lisbon, Portugal, and tickets usually go on sale each October and sell out every edition.
Our conversation with them at the conference, we wanted to reflect back on the interview 11 years ago and the book from 11 years ago, and project that into now and see what we can pick up and what's changed.
I think so, yeah. But Chris and Nathan being who they are, I mean, we were all over the place, but in a very, very interesting place.
So in my preparation for this gathering, reunion, we could call it, I look back at the transcript from our chat in 2012, some 11 years ago now, and it's quite a typical dialogue, I think, at least between, probably all four of us. Nathan, you made a small technical error when talking to a date, and Chris couldn't resist correcting the technical error and making sure we had the factually correct number for this. We're talking about years.
Not unlike either of us.
No. and then Per makes a comforting comment, trying to kind of say, it's okay, I do this too. And then, of course, I dive in with the jokey comment and the jokey response and make comments about our ages and time flies by in decades and so on, and go on to say, we'll book an interview with you again in 10 years. So we can have the new meetup and talk about this again. So
and we'll actually have to play that clip.
And in fact, I came up with the title of the book back then too, but never did anything on it until about 96, I believe, when I started talking to Chris about it, and he said, yeah, right on, this sounds like fun. And even back then, we had a feeling that there'd be something interesting in that kind of investigation, but we had no idea exactly what would, come out of it, or that we would find so much material.
Quick data, not 96, 2006, right?
Oh yeah, I'm sorry, 2006.
I tend to make the same mistake.
Yeah, no, decades fly by now. Yeah. It's a sign of our ages, probably.
Yeah. I mean, I was just going to say, like, it's one kind of nerd thing to have been doing this 6 years.
Yeah, we'll book the interview. We'll book the interview with you in 10 years' time, so we can have the
okay, good.
The re-meet up and talk about it.
So, Nathan got his decades mixed up. He said 96 instead of 2006.
Dig it. Okay.
Yeah, and you...
So petty of me, I'm sorry.
What were we talking about? The subject?
You were actually going back to the origins of Make It So, and the very first research you did into the topic.
How long you'd actually been working on the book.
Yeah, and then how it moved on to the next stage, and then when you actually started working on the book. No, in 2006 landed on
1886 around there.
Around
1886. Yeah. Something like that.
Because I think I came up with the idea for it on the train, on Caltrain, and that would have been 89.
You did mention the 80s,
Okay.
and then we moved on. That's what I think you went into the 90s,
okay.
but Chris then said, well, actually, that bit was too...
It's all a blur
Yeah,
now.
it's all a blur. It's so long ago.
What's the saying about the 60s? If you grew up, if you remember the 60s, you weren't there?
Exactly. So if you remember our first chat in 2012, you weren't there. Yeah. But going on from, because I kept on looking a bit at the transcript of the episode, and in the time and space we are in now, AIs, and I'll say AI without getting into a more detailed definition of that, even though someone's looking at me across the table and probably would like to. We don't mention AIs in that original conversation about sci-fi interfaces. And I thought, okay, maybe just the letters A and I we don't use. Maybe there's some variants. I tried to look for agents or agentive or artificial. I couldn't find any mention of these things, which kind of surprised me, but at the same time, it maybe made me reflect more about the time we are in now.
Because back then it was really about interfaces, I guess.
Yeah.
That was the thing.
Well, we definitely had agents and anthropomorphized interfaces and conversational interfaces in the book. Maybe it didn't come up in the conversation.
Yeah, that was no criticism of the fact we should have mentioned it. It's more a reflection on, that was
What
a
else
thing,
we had
that
to
was a
talk about.
category, that was there. But, we didn't have that burning need to talk about AIs. So if we did that conversation now, that chapter would have got those films would have got a much, much, much bigger slot in the interview.
Right. Which is essentially the talk you just did.
Yeah, it's true.
I have a question for you, Chris, and that is maybe because there's not a Hollywood film that necessarily... Well, so when I have my talk about the history of conversational interfaces, it starts at the burning bush, which I get isn't necessarily an AI, but the next one is...
No, it's a good one.
The next one is the golem.
Yep.
Okay.
And so would you consider the golem AI, and it obviously predates Metropolis, but would it fit in that investigation not being a movie, or would it have to permute to like Frankenstein?
To processing, and obviously I'm very slow after the conference is over. I try and really put hard boundaries around the survey. So I think in the book I wrote in 2017, I referenced the golem as an example of an agentive interface, which would lead me to say, oh yes, but in the context of science fiction, it's arguable.
Yeah,
it's arguable, but it's a great citation in the history of conversational interfaces, especially because the on and off switch is linguistic. I don't know if you guys know that.
Okay.
No.
Explain a little bit.
I don't read Hebrew, so do you want to? Are you?
I'm not familiar. Well, I mean, I don't know if there is an off switch, but the birth moment is when you inscribe and I don't know. I think it's probably a specific word in Hebrew.
It's the Aleph, isn't it?
But is it just the Aleph, or is there? See, now I'm getting confused with one of Ted Chiang's short stories, which is just brilliant. Have you read this? No. You know Ted Chiang, who he wrote the short story that became Arrival.
Okay.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
Most amazing writer in
wow.
the 20th century, as far as I'm concerned, because every single short story is a completely unique, different world that you have never thought of before. But one of his stories is, I don't know how to characterize it other than to say it's like Hebrew punk. It's sort of steampunk with golems. So the most important people in manufacturing are Hebrew mystic writers who have to write out the instructions for the golem on a sheet of paper in Hebrew, so you're writing right to left. And I think there's a specific amount of characters that you have to use, so it becomes a limiting factor in your coding. And then you wrap it up and you put it in the back of the neck of the clay golem, and it comes to life and does that function. And so now I'm getting confused of, does the classic golem, the original golem, have one letter or a couple letters?
I'm going to sound more knowledgeable than I am. I'm looking at Wikipedia at the moment. And the golem originally had the aleph, and to turn the golem on, and then you would remove the aleph from the word emet. Am I saying it right? Which means truth. And when you remove the aleph, it becomes death, and that turns the golem off.
Oh, I never knew that.
Yeah, which I found just it's a wonderful linguistic pun in the middle of that wonderful myth.
Truth to death.
Wow.
And then we got confirmed there was an off switch.
Yeah, exactly. Well, and so my question to your question was going to be, what's the topic that we should be mentioning today that we will end up be talking about in 10 years?
Oh, that's a fascinating one for us to maybe come back to as a ending question that we can think about during this little journey of ours.
Okay.
Because, then we can come back in another 10 years.
But I feel like there's an AI in the room, isn't there? Because everybody's talking about AI these days. But at the same time, as you were alluding to, nobody is actually talking about something that they can define, which is a bit of a struggle for us because everybody keeps bringing it up. How do you guys feel about this word just being thrown around and meaning absolutely anything, it seems?
So I did a workshop yesterday where I was teaching sort of fundamentals of design for AI, and I was touching on the three core components for me are fancy algorithms that interact with models based on vast data. I think that covers the majority of what has been called AI, and as far as I can prognosticate, what may be AI in the future. So for my money, those are the constituent parts, if you want to work with that. But you're right, like in the from the 1970s, we considered spell check would have been a really powerful AI, and now it's just a function.
Right.
It changes over time.
Oh, that's interesting. Because I was just going to say, do you think then we're stuck with the definition of AI now, and we're going to have to invent like superintelligence? Do we have to have new phrases to move on to when we've kind of like outworn? So we've worn out these things that we have as AI. But what you're saying now is no, maybe not.
Well,
sadly, yes. I think. Yeah.
We have words that change their meaning based on context. Pronouns, the word horizon. Those change. Your horizon is different than my horizon. Your listeners have a horizon all their own as they hear these words. And that's kind of like a pronoun word. It depends on the context. So I think that the social context and to some extent the technological context will decide whether we keep that word or throw it away. We've already been through a couple of AI winters over the history of artificial intelligence. And nobody would touch AI for a very long time. Even the term, even though that's why we invented machine learning. Because that's not AI. That won't cost me the funding that I need for my project. But now it's back in vogue again, and we'll see how far it goes. But I was remembering one of the things that we discovered when we were writing the original book is we went back to the very beginning of cinema. It's part of our survey that informed the book, and we rewatched La Voyage dans la Lune. And that's when you realize that there's zero interfaces in that film. Like when they want to open the door to the rocket, they just push it. Right?
Certainly, I mean, you could sort of say that is a kind of interface, but what you're saying is, there's no sort of
surface,
it's manual.
Artificial,
intermediary.
Yeah, exactly.
That's
mediated interface.
Assisted. There's no assistance there. You're just pushing something out.
Yeah, there was a fellow who used the term the Gutenberg parenthesis. I forget his name. Please forgive me. It's something I have to look up. But it was his thesis paper at the Royal College of Art. When I ran across, I think the title of it was Into the Hot. It was a weird thesis. But to use the phrase, the Gutenberg parenthesis, really points out that what feels like something that is permanent as a part of the world has a beginning and it will probably have an end. And I think Jeff Jarvis, that's not the one I'm remembering. So the guy I'm thinking of was referencing Jeff Jarvis. Thank you so much. So it may be that there's an AI parenthesis, or there may even be an interface parenthesis. Yeah. And in fact, I kind of believe we're getting close to it. Lots of designers are asking the question, what does it mean to be an interface designer in a world where I can speak to a computer and have it do the thing?
Yeah,
So,
I have to say that I'm very frustrated with the co-opting of the term AI, which now has just been, laid onto machine learning. And now such that people who are doing real AI, like really looking at artificial intelligence, now have to modify the term and call it, AGI or GAI or whatever. To play off what Chris is saying, that's sort of the natural language, the natural evolution of language, and it's not like I'm going to hold that dike back, but I think it's problematic, especially when you look at the media, and you just an hour ago put this beautiful survey up and identified where the media's stories are that they shouldn't be and where they aren't that they should be writing stories about or reporting about. And to me, that's the difference between, reporters or filmmakers understanding that this AI isn't I, it's ML.
Oh, right.
But confusing that with stories about AI, right? And the difference there, and the reason why, if you read right now, this is, almost June of 2023, if you read an article that references the Terminator or killer robots or anything like that, you automatically know that reporter or writer has no idea what AI is and has no idea what is important about what we call AI and what's happening, and has no way, they don't know where the story is.
Yeah.
Can I share one quick anecdote?
Please.
I have a colleague that I worked with who was at Google and moved to Meta. Or was it the opposite? No, he was at Google. Now he's at Meta. I don't know if he still is because of all the recent layoffs. Anyway, he and his friends like to joke about time to Terminator, which is a metric that they keep for conferences and every speaker. How quickly over the course, and I don't think I didn't hear it once here, but how quickly will the speaker about AI mention Terminator? And I jokingly added it as literally the first word I made at a conference where I knew he would be.
Well, you had a picture of Terminator at least.
Did I? In today's thing?
I believe so.
Yeah, there was one of your slides about films.
Oh, all the
10
example.
I think the examples 10 was again. But now, thinking back, I think we talked about this in the first chat from Make It So, or if not in the book as well, that the sci-fi of now can only reflect society or the culture of now. So thinking about the terminology thing, are we going to see now a phase of sci-fi films which have to incorporate this world where we have used AI to mean all these machine learning things, because basically now they've all passed the Turing test, so they seem it's kind of job done for AI. Now they are AIs, and we have to use things like super intelligence, so on, to go beyond it just now, because we're bridging different technologies, so we need several times in parallel at the moment, and that then presumably maybe feeds into Hollywood.
Yes. Hollywood always has to extend the current paradigm. And every time there is a great leap in literacy, it makes a lot of old titles look super stupid when they were just, guessing. Or what's the Dreams one? 80s film, guy spills soda on his keyboard. Electric Dreams.
Yeah.
Electric Dreams.
Is that right? Yeah, it's Electric Dreams, where a guy spills a soda on a keyboard, and that wakes his computer up. Like, at the time, it might have been even, tongue-in-cheeky, but now it just looks so dumb. Anyway, yes.
like the teenagers ripping up magazine photos and inserting it to make...
to a scanner on Real Genius. It's so dumb. But
it
because it worked, right? Like you saw the evidence in the film.
Exactly.
Like why they buried that technology, I don't know.
Conspiracy.
So, yeah, totally. It's a vast conspiracy. So yes, and there's always a treadmill of increasing literacy and how Hollywood writers extend that, and it's not ever going to end. There was a intern at my job at IBM as part of the Design for AI Guild that I run who did a really interesting project about how we talk about AI and to be as specific as possible, balanced with being as accessible as possible. That's not an easy rope to walk, and it is one that sci-fi runs and abuses quite often. But as long as the movie sells, the studio's happy.
I think that the difference I'm talking about is really whether it's characterized as sentient or not, right? So I think as far back as sci-fi goes, we have writers and movies and actors and whatever portraying sentience, artificial sentience, and everything that is what we now call today AI, which is, incredibly impressive machine functioning, was just never seen as sentience. It was just sort of technology, right? Like so in Eagle Eye, or CSI, like enhance, right? Like that's what we're seeing every day now. Apps that do these kinds of things to some extent, but we don't think of that as sentience. And so I think that the conversation about AI that's out there in the world between Wired magazine and some local paper versus an MSNBC or something is still centered on the sentience of technology. Is it happening? Is it not happening? What happens if they take over? Elon Musk says he's worried. That's the weirdness of the conversation, because there really isn't a lot of conversation outside of the tech, design, and a little bit of the sort of innovation investing world around like these capabilities of what we now call AI.
It's funny because the sentience question is always, it's very weird to me, partially because it's always a yes or no question, and that's ridiculous. I read, and I talked about in the workshop yesterday, a book that I read last year by Ed Yong called An Immense World. And in it, he goes through and talks about animal perception and the resulting hints about animal consciousness. And it really points out, and in the intro of the book, he talks about or describes like a gymnasium room with an elephant, a snake, a human, and a spider, and one other animal. And he says, to the human, they think that they can see it all, and so they can see that as the room. But each animal lives in a different world in that same space. And it really raises the question of the alienness of familiar sentiences. And the question for me personally about AI is not, is it sentient? Because we're plowing towards that as best as we can, for better or for worse, but what kind of sentience is it? And I only see a very few films that are asking that key question. And one of the best ones, and I now cannot remember if this was out when we were writing the book, but Under the Skin. Do you know this film?
No.
I just started singing Under the Sea from Little Mermaid.
No.
Oh, my word.
So Under the Skin is this brilliant film. It was filmed in Scotland, but Scarlett Johansson is the name actress in it. And I'm not going to give spoilers, but she goes, this happens in the very early part of the film, she goes around this city in Scotland luring men like with sexual come-ons, and then they get back to this building, and these men get these sort of dopey expressions on their faces as they're following her, and they don't acknowledge what we as the audience can see is this oil black seamless environment that they've entered into. And as they're sort of following her like a fish
siren,
or like a siren, like they slowly, with every step, they get lower and lower in this black inky space until they fall into it, and then they are digested. And it's this beautiful depiction of an otherworldly sentience in a way that fits film really beautifully.
Annihilation was one of those to me.
Oh yeah, weird core.
Yeah.
Yeah, like it's just going to be stranger than we can possibly think. I'm looking forward to seeing more films, especially with the recent rise of ChatGPT, more writers begin to explore that space. What is the alienness of AI, and what does that mean if we are using it to access the world?
But going back to what, I mean, you're essentially suggesting that sentience may very well be a continuum, right? Spectrum, and humans are maybe on one, maybe not at the pinnacle, but we're over on this end, and insects or whatever are over on this end. And we already know that, AI technology, whatever, is capable of the level, functioning at the level of intelligence of insects and even small animals. And I think when we were doing presentations about Make It So, I was telling people, stop personifying your interfaces and your systems and your interactive televisions as people. Why don't you try pets? Because the level of intelligence, quote unquote, of a pet and where the technology could at least simulate sentience or intelligence was so much closer. And why wouldn't you want, your TV to be a pet than another person? It just seems like
sex expectation is much better.
Well, yeah, right. The failover to disappointment isn't as big.
The legal consequences possibly are a bit different as well.
But considering from November on, now we're in different territory. Yeah.
But what I'm hearing from what you're saying, Chris, is that, we won't be able to define the type of sentience that perhaps is actually developing, because it's something that we are not capable of understanding.
I don't think we're even yet agreement in the animal world of where it begins.
Exactly. Yeah.
So if we're not finished like you and your scale there, Nathan. If on the other insect scales or microorganisms and so on, if we don't really know where the grayness,
right,
it's not all white at the end here.
It used to be like, humans are tool users. That's what sets us apart. And then we find out, like monkeys and dogs,
lots of
animals,
fish,
and crows and fish and octopi.
Okay,
it's not about a tool. Maybe it's opposable thumbs. So there's monkeys and what. Like we keep moving the goalpost because we have to
make ourselves special.
And so, one thing I'm looking forward to is these technologies will really help us question what that whole idea of sentience is, right? Like we already had the Google engineer declare it's alive, right? And it's not, but it's getting close enough that confusion is getting easier and easier to make.
Yeah.
This might be, I don't know if this is political, but maybe. Just thinking though, then we're saying sentient, but then also you've got life. And we have all the kind of, when does life begin?
Yeah.
When does sentience begin? Are they the same moment, or does one come later? Can we end up with a situation where we have machines who have maybe achieved one level that is higher than a living thing that eventually crosses that threshold?
There's been a lot of talk about that recently, and we're going far field of interface, and that's fine. I love it. I have an outline for a book about designing for animals, like literally for them as users. And
a long history of that.
Yeah. And part of that has been doing research into this question of sentience. And the thing that really struck with me that I learned last year is that the current thinking, and I will have to open up my iPad to look at sketch notes for the source, but the concept is that it was mobility that developed sentience. Because if an animal, a stationary animal, develops a set of senses about what's coming towards me, and if it's a threat, avoid it. But the moment an animal becomes mobile, it has to subtract its own motion, or every time it moves, it panics. Crap, that wall is moving towards me. Oh shit, that curtain is attacking me, right? You have to subtract that, or the animal will freak out all the time. It is that subtraction that begins to outline a sense of self. And a sense of self is the core of the theory of mind. Yeah, really fascinating. I know we've gone far.
I have an interview somewhere in my archives that never got published for the Demystifying Multimedia book with a designer at Apple who was designing, he did interfaces for Coco, and he did interfaces.
The gorilla?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And for, the fascinating ones were dolphins.
Yeah.
Or dolphin. Where he said that the big difference, because you have to get into animal vision, right? Like if you're doing that kind of interface, the big difference with dolphin is that the interface constantly has to be moving or they can't see it.
When I taught for 1 year when Brenda Laurel was the head of the CCA program, and I taught both the undergraduates and the grads in interaction design, and one of my early assignments was to design a banking interface for a shark.
Nice.
For the same reason. Like they have to have constant airflow or they drown. Water flow because of the oxygen, or they drown. And it poses this whole weird worldview of how on earth do you do that? Anyway, it's going to raise all sorts of questions.
Okay, this is truly fascinating. But
the places we'll go.
I am going to bring it back to, like, I'm trying to think of, so what's going through our listeners' minds right now?
And this isn't about interfaces or sci-fi.
We're developing a really good book list. And
exactly,
list that needs to be
that's going into the show notes, absolutely,
right.
definitely.
So how can I apply
But
this
at the
in my
same
work?
time, some of these things, they seem so complex, and a lot of designers are getting their information from the media, which we just criticized. They were not aware of what's going on, really, and perhaps the reporting is under par. But what should I, as a designer, be expected to understand about all this? What should I be doing to make myself... I'm perhaps not afraid of being replaced by an AI, but I want to use it because I'm interested and curious, and perhaps I can make cooler things and better things, performing things for my clients, for my users. Where do I start? What am I supposed to be doing right now? Because everything is moving so fast.
I'm only going to start with a few anecdotes about how fast it's moving. Massive industries, blue chip industries, are retooling around ChatGPT, and that was released in November. That's only 6 months ago. AutoGPT and Baby AGI was released maybe 2 months ago. Midjourney came to its own in fall of last year, and even in the workshop, I had 2 slides where it's and this came out Monday, but wait, this came out Tuesday, and I haven't had time to adequately process it. And even though my job at IBM is to stay on top of this, it is the most overwhelming part of my job. So, a couple of anecdotes to say, we're all struggling. Don't worry. It's very fast and very furious. Oh, that's a bad reference. My apologies.
Well, you left the number off,
because
so it's a vague reference.
The next one's going to be written by AI. Number 11.
Based on all the others.
Right?
Yeah.
Based on all the
so
others.
I would say that you're absolutely right about how fast this is moving. And it's moving faster than anyone can keep up with, let alone sort of conceive of the boundaries. But the first answer I have to my designers is experiment, use these things. The worst thing I think a designer can do is what a lot of designers did at the dawn of desktop publishing, which is, no, I will not, that's not typography. I can't control typography. I can't control color. I will stick with print. And okay, there's still print around, right? But they missed an enablement of design that, has been orders of magnitude. So I think the worst thing a designer could do is say, it's more than I can deal with. I don't want to deal with. I want to keep to my process and tools. So I try to have my students just explore, play. I give them assignments so that they can see also where it's not really good. I think when I talk about AIs, ML, AI, whatever, I call them regurgitrons, right? Because they beautifully, elegantly regurgitate what they've been given, and that's sort of all they can do, at least at the moment. They're not terrible. They're generative in this other weird way, but they're not original. And they have a built-in regression to the mean, so they're really good at mediocre. If you're a sitcom or a rom-com writer, it's over. Because it turns out most of that's mediocre anyway, right? It's not going to be If you're a really good one, you're going to rise above. So my students, they can get 60 to 80% of the way there on their assignment. They still have to do the other 20 to 40. Not that they do, but you have to explore that. You have to play with that. The other piece of it is prompt design is a new design field. Like, how do you design a prompt to get the feedback that you want or the output out of a ChatGPT, or especially like a Stable Diffusion or Midjourney? That's a skill that they need to learn, which is an entirely new skill.
And we, when we talked to you, Chris, about agentive technology, I remember us talking about just that skill of, as a designer, being able to say good option, bad option, judging what is produced by these generative systems. And that's an incredibly important skill, and one at the moment that can't be done by the systems themselves. Because it's a judgment, it's a subjective decision.
I don't want to nerd out too hard.
Oh.
It can.
See, I shouldn't have said can't, shouldn't I?
Right.
I know. As soon as I said it, I had the voice inside that said, "James, you just said can't." Like, he's going to come with examples.
The way that adversarial networks work is actually with two AIs. One that spits out 10 options, and the other one which says which is closest to this prompt. Which of these images is closest to this prompt? So in fact, it is judging, but all it's doing is fit, not quality, not even novelty. When I have been playing with ChatGPT, I always stump it by saying things like, what's an atypical example of this object? And like that implies a field awareness and the ability to recognize within that what are the exceptions. Humans are still pretty good at that, and I always crash ChatGPT when I ask it for those sorts of things.
Is that when it starts hallucinating best?
No, so the new version of ChatGPT, and again, the speed of this thing, this was released last week, I think. But now it can, ChatGPT 4, and this will seem ancient by the time somebody listens to this later, now can browse and plan. So, and there are also all sorts of other plugins. But you can do something like say, hey, go to the UX podcast website and find all the interviews with Nathan Shedroff and Chris Noessel, and then summarize them in a timeline. We tried it right before the end of today's talks, and it didn't work, but that's because we were only 2 steps into the prompt design. I'm fairly sure we could get it to work eventually.
We tried it for 10 seconds. So.
Yeah, and that was it.
And so to your point, it would be interesting, essentially I expect nothing to happen if you go to ChatGPT and say, what are the topics that Chris and Nathan should have been talking about in their interviews, right? I don't know.
I don't
turnips.
I don't think it could handle the task that I set out for myself in the talk today, which is, what is Hollywood not telling us about AI? Those are hard questions to answer. I did think of one other thing, which would be an advice for listeners. Because AI is a technological thing that we are trying to adapt our work and our lives and our world to, I believe one of the challenges for designers is to, and this is hard, but stay on top of the news and get good at separating the techno jargon from what matters to humans, right? It might be of interest to know the difference between one-shot learning and the different types of neural networks there are. But as a designer, you don't really need to know. I'm saying that now. I can even hear my own caveat. But for the most part, right, reducing the AI and filtering all the stuff you're reading down to, how will I use this? What does this mean for the things I need to equip our users to do? Is a great filter to develop. Because there's so much technobabble. Well, I think I just brushed the mic. I'm going to say that again. There's so much technobabble that you have to be the filter. I try and do my best. The poster that I referenced in the workshop yesterday was me literally doing that, looking at the algorithms, the 3 algorithms that underlie AI, and really saying, here's what matters. Here are the inputs, here are the outputs, here's what it does, here are examples, and here are the interactions that are germane to that function. So I'm not the only one that's doing it, probably. So finding those people who can do that if you can't do it yourself is a good thing, but better is to develop that your skill yourself.
Well, and the title of your talk was, it doubles down on the sense of, the point you're making is it's always about the people. Like if you're on the design side, the interface side, whatever, it's always about people and how is AI going to serve people. If you're on the engineering side, maybe there's there's cases where you just care about the technology and the technology interfacing with other technology. But, we, in these discussions, often some people can get sidetracked and forget that, no, we're designing this for people. In the same sense that in my workshop yesterday or 2 days ago, whatever, someone always invariably comes up to me afterwards and says, well, this all sounds really good for B2C, but I'm in a B2B market, and I'm enterprise, and I don't understand how emotions and value and meaning fit, because they only care about features and price. And my answer is, you're not looking hard enough, because as long as there's another person, all this stuff still works. But business people for so long, especially in the tech industry, have been able to squish their brains in this weird way so that they can forget that there are people involved, because it's just numbers, and the quantitative optimizers love that. But the message you're giving us about AI, Chris, is that no, people. Like, remember the people. Look at the people. Look at what they need. Look at how it interfaces with, like, in some senses, who cares how the technology side works?
Yeah, I think there's a second answer. That first answer is 100% true for us as designers. Yeah. We also have to acknowledge that AI stands to upend civilization and entire labor markets, and so as citizens, we don't need to pay attention deeply to the technology, but about the broad scale consequences of that technology. But the things that we need to do there aren't like, oh, I'm going to go in and design something different. I may have to go vote or convince other people and educate them about, well, okay, what does ChatGPT mean for the labor market? And then what do we do with the jobs that are about to be obviated? And sorry, I misspoke. With the people whose jobs are about to be obviated. Yeah, I guess I just talked myself right back around to what we were talking about, which is it's still about the people.
Well, except that's going to be a huge challenge on a philosophical and political and even religious level for a lot of people who are, especially in the United States, trying to eke out. We have this form. It's not even capitalism; it's corporatism, right? Like, eke out every last penny and out of the system. It's so extractive that already we have job problems, right? And there's the moralization of, well, we won't give you food stamps unless you jump through these hoops and prove that you're looking for work. And there's all sorts of stuff that all the research says
U.S. problem, not a Sweden problem.
Doesn't work, right? And we're at this kind of détente in the United States between these philosophies, these approaches to solving problems, and here comes AI, and neither side is ready for that the consequences of that, because it's gonna be impossible to hold to this idea that welfare is morally repugnant and people are gaming the system and that's not just, etc. Like, there will be so many people out of jobs, and white collar jobs, not blue collar jobs, that it'll be impossible, I think, to hold fast to these traditional moral views of work and compensation.
There's something really funny. So the pushback, the kickback against ChatGPT and Midjourney has been so loud, even from close friends of mine on social media. But I got into a conversation fairly recently about, where were you at the dawn of desktop publishing? My first job out of undergraduate was as a typesetter, a photo typesetter. And that job went away. Nobody was infuriated. But now, I think it's a bit of hubris on humans' part just to think, oh, art is special, writing is special. Turns out, not so much. Quality art, right? Quality art and quality writing, and even novel writing and novel art is hard and difficult, and maybe still not the purview of AI, and taste is not the purview of AI. But we've hit a point where we're touching on deep emotional things that we have to wrangle with, because it's no different than the desktop revolution as far as my old job was concerned, but it is different in the scale and the speed at which it's going to happen.
So there'll be new jobs, and lots of people lose their current jobs, like Chris's example there. But what I think is really interesting that you said, Chris, about your job is to keep on top of the changes, what's going on in the AI world, and you can't keep up just now.
Yeah.
Right?
I did say both things, didn't I?
Yeah. So we're in an inevitable period now where policy does not have a hell's chance. There is no way policy can keep up. If Chris can't keep up and people involved in this branch can't keep up, then policy definitely can't. It wasn't going to keep up anyway. Now it really can't. So, and policy is what we need to revolutionize education, because a part of the answer, I guess, to this thing of where all the jobs going to go, all these people without their jobs. No, it's the generations coming up need to be trained so that the new jobs that are coming, they can fit into them. But it's so fast now, we're not going to get the policy in place, and we're not going to understand what that is.
Except I think if you go back to people as your grounding philosophy, maybe policy will never be able to keep up, but it could certainly keep up better than it is now, right? Our leaders. And we can
even enforcement of current policy.
Right.
Yeah.
Or redefining, we had the wrong sort of specifications, but our intent was this, and we can change the specifications. We know what skills humans need to be, children need to be, or adults need to be retrained with. It's very clear: creative thinking, strategic thinking, systems thinking, design thinking, communication, collaboration skills, and critical thinking. I think those are the ones I've put together, right? ChatGPT, these technologies are not good at those. So yes, we need to redesign education. And then we need to redesign the assessment of, education, because, every college, every high school, every school instructor right now is dealing with, what do you do when they have ChatGPT write their essay? Well, maybe, book report was never the assessment that someone learned something that we all assumed and pretended it was. Now it's clearly not. So change your pedagogy. It's time. Get off your ass. Sorry, you're still in the workforce when this happened, but you got to change. And I don't think a lot of people are ready to do that, especially in academia.
Yeah. I also think the modern Luddite movement needs to be brought to the fore, and people need to get on board. So Luddism, as it was corporate washed, was about an unreasonable fear of machinery in progress.
Right.
That's a very useful denouncement for a corporation to make. But I was recently reading a book called Breaking Things at Work by Gavin Mueller, and it was all about the sort of factual history of the Luddites. And in fact, they were a labor movement who were concerned with losing power in negotiations with mill owners, which once you put a mechanized loom in a factory, suddenly the hand loom people no longer have negotiations for their jobs. And they're like, and this is going to ruin our quality of life. We're going to have to travel to a factory, factory to do a job.
It was all about fair wages.
We're going to be replaceable. It's about quality of life. And so that is now back in relevance, right? We can either structure industries and, from a design perspective, individual relationships of users to AI as either you are the babysitter of this thing, and therefore you are much easier to replace, or we can design them as augmentations. And business, qua business, does not have the incentives to make that happen. It has to come from a pressure both from other systems, such as government, but they're slow, or us, I'm pointing to everyone at this table, and everyone listening, to put pressure and vote with your dollars, vote with your vote, in order to steer the powers that be away from creating AI systems that just replace people or turn them into not managers. That implies things that I don't want to. Babysitters. Turn them into the babysitters of the AI. That's a terrible world, and I don't want to live in it. But while we're on this thread, I did want to add one other thing to our long and listing book recommendations. I just started it on the plane, but Matthew Wazinski's Design After Capitalism touches on a lot of these issues and even has a section on Luddism that I'm eager to get to. Highly recommended already, and I'm only on chapter 3. But it touches on a lot of these issues.
Do you know, we're not going to have time to go back to the question at the beginning about what kind of interfaces, sci-fi interfaces we'll be talking about in 10 years.
Because we just don't know.
So it's fine. We just book the interview in 10 years and get on with it.
Okay, there you go.
Yeah. Definitely.
It's a cliffhanger.
Yeah.
It is a good cliffhanger.
Thank you a huge
Thank you,
amount.
guys.
Thank
That
you,
was
Chris,
wonderful.
for this chat.
Really,
I feel like we just got started.
Yeah, it just got started.
Recommended listening? Well, I think a good choice this time out of our many interviews with Chris we've done over the years. It's go back to episode 121, Agentive Technology. I mentioned it a little bit in the interview, but this is from 7 years ago now.
Well, 121, I was going to say.
Yeah,
that's
7 years ago
as well.
We talk about digital assistants and agents and using technology to do things for us. So it's very much aligned with what we've been talking about and very relevant still.
It's a fun one. You say agentive, I say agentive. I think it's one of those. You say potato, I say potato.
I think
both are correct.
We do actually talk about that in the show. So, and if you want me and Per as part of your next conference, event, or in-house training, we are offering workshops, talks, and courses to inspire and help you grow as individuals, teams, and organizations. To find out more, just get in touch by emailing hey@uxpodcast.com.
Remember to keep moving.
See you on the other side. What do you call a bee that can't make up its mind?
I don't know, James. What do you call a bee that can't make up its mind?
Maybe.